Our next featured reader is KP Gresham. She's the award-winning author of 3 Days at Wrigley Field, a book she began writing while attending the Rice University Novels Writing Colloquiem in Houston, Texas. She is also the author of the Pastor Matt Hayden Mystery series, of which The Preacher's First Murder is currently available. KP has won awards in the Mystery Writers of America novel contests, as well as the Bay Area Writers League Best Novel competition. A full-time writer, KP and her husband call the Austin area home. KP?
Thank you very much, and thank you, Malvern, for hosting us. I loved it when Becky, manager, put out an email to us, and she said, it's 2 different kind of fantasies that we'll be reading tonight. So Amber's that was really cool. Mine is a completely different kind of fantasy, but it is mine nonetheless, or it was mine. This is about whether or not, no, you know what? I'm going to set the stage for you by reading it. Just for the record, before performance-enhancing drugs and corked bats, there was baseball. My book is 3 Days at Wrigley Field, by the way. This book takes place in 1998 for that reason, right in the middle of America's delusionment with baseball after the strikes. Major League Baseball suffered 8 work stoppages between 72 and 1995, including the cancellation of the entire 1994 season. So in other words, there are a lot of unhappy baseball fans. And it was important for me to have that as the bed for how this might possibly happen. So, on to my little fantasy. March 2nd, 1980. The young girl stood at the dime store curbside, tears streaking down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I'm sorry I spilled." "I don't give a damn," her father yelled. The 9-year-old cowered back in fear as he came around the old yellow Buick toward her. She'd learned to run from his big hands. If they weren't hitting, they were doing other dirty things. "I'm tired of you messing up my car, and I'm tired of you crying all the time." "Victor?" The girl's too thin mother appeared at the store's doorway. "Rachel, what's going on?" "That snot-nosed brat dumped her Coke in the back seat." The woman's face showed her fright. "I'll go back in and get some napkins." "You'll do no such thing. I told you she was too much trouble. You should have left her with your brother." "She's our daughter, Victor. I couldn't leave our baby in Detroit." The child slunk away from her parents. "My kid, Anita? We're not sure about that, are we?" The man glowered at the woman. The girl ducked behind a pop machine a ways down the sidewalk and squeezed her eyes shut. "What do you mean, Victor?" the mother demanded. "I mean, she's got a nice butt, Anita. You know how I like a nice butt." "You wouldn't dare." "Your choice, Anita. You know, she stays here or she comes with us, under my terms." The little girl peeked out from her hiding place in time to see Victor grab her mother and yank her toward the Buick. The woman pulled against his hold. "No!" He slapped the young mother across the face and shoved her in the car. "Okay, she's coming with. Rachel?" "No!" Anita screamed. She reached into the back seat and pulled out a garbage bag. The child ran from her hiding place when she realized her mother was throwing her clothes out of the car. "Mama!" she cried. "Let her come, Anita." Victor's smile was evil as he stalked around the side of the Buick and heaved open the driver's side door. No, she's not coming." Anita ducked back into the car and threw out another bag with Rachel's prized possessions. I'll come back for you," she said hoarsely, dropping the bag on the ground. "Mama!" Rachel screamed. "The police will take care of her, Anita," the man roared. "Hell, this place is crawling with cops." The girl reached for her mother as the man brought the engine to life. "Mama!" The woman held out her arms, though the tires squealed and the car lurched forward. The mother and daughter's hands almost touched, almost grasped. But then the car was speeding down the dirt road, her mother screaming out the window, "I'll come back for you, Rachel, I'll come back!" "Mama!" the girl cried, running after the car. She tripped over the bag and the baseball rolled out onto the pavement. By the time she got to her feet, the car was hidden from view by the cloud of dust it left in its wake. She fell to her knees, crying. The baseball stopped by her bony legs, and she looked into its blurry white orb through her tears. Mama, don't leave me. Then, from the dust, came a horrendous clamor. Wheels screeched, brakes dug. Finally came the loud, ripping crunch of steel and glass and sounds the little girl couldn't identify. A siren started to wail. Terror gripped her. The police! Her father had always told her what a bad girl she was. They would take her away, and her mother wouldn't know where to find her. The siren was getting louder and closer. Mama, Mama, she sobbed. She hugged the ball to her chest, not sure whether to run toward the dust and the horrible noise or away from the police. She was such a bad little girl. Mama. The dust turned to fog. It enveloped her in its gray and black swirls. The child's lungs fought for air. She was running, her footsteps sounding hollow in the endless dark fog. She turned her head to look behind her, but she saw nothing. The darkness was too complete. Then later, how long she did not know, she heard people talking. The voices came closer to her. No name. All the car registration, everything burned in the fire. Another voice said, have to call CPS. I'll see if we can take her to Sister Anna's for the time being, a woman's voice this time. Catholic orphanage is as good a place as any for tonight, at least. The girl felt a man's strong arm encircle her and lift her from the curb. She had no strength, no desire to resist, no feeling at all. The fog began to swirl around her again, and she gave in to its comforting nothingness. 23 years later, Chicago, Illinois. It's a beautiful day for a ball game. Let's play too. Ernie Banks. Mr. McAllister, man, are you hard to find. A very blonde, very young Jonathan Waters grinned down at his boss. Michael Shaw McAllister looked up from the pew where he sat, 8 rows back from the altar in St. Stephen's sprawling sanctuary. Jonathan, the old man said in surprise, how did you find me? It's my job to find people, remember? Mike's eyes twinkled despite the illness that ravaged his body. Jonathan Waters was the kind of man who could make you forget your troubles, Mike thought, because Jonathan still believed in the impossible. Mike liked the boy, always had, ever since hiring Jonathan 2 years ago as a scout for the professional baseball team Mike owned, the Chicago Cubs. Well, you found me, boy, Mike said, scooting over. No, can't stay. I just wanted you to know she's here. Mike's expression went blank. Who's here? Rachel Cavaretti, the woman I've been talking to you about for the last 2 weeks. Mike sighed. 3. Jonathan Waters grinned. 3, he agreed. Got tickets for her right behind home plate. I'll bring her up as soon as the game's over. I'll think about it, Mike said, not wanting to consider it at all. Jonathan turned to leave, then stopped. Almost forgot. The baseball commissioner's here. Cannon? Surprise, huh? No one's too happy about it. Jonathan flashed an apologetic smile. Gotta run. You might want to find a short-sleeved shirt today. It's a scorcher. Mike didn't even have the chance to say goodbye before the whirlwind of Jonathan Waters was down the long aisle of St. Stephen's and out the heavy front doors. Mike sighed. Today he was in no mood to face Robert Cannon, Jr., the self-proclaimed savior of baseball after the devastating strike of '94. Given his druthers, Mike would prefer to sit in the coolness of his beloved St. Stephen's. He looked fondly around the sanctuary that he had sweat and bled to help refurbish. Cement pillars interrupted every 10th row of pews, reaching 40 feet into the air to hold up the arched mosaic ceiling. Sandstone walls gave way to an imposing stained glass window over the front white marble altar. 2 blocks to the north, up Waveland Avenue, stood the other structure Mike McAllister loved most in his life, Wrigley Field. Mike's wrinkled but well-manicured fingers folded prayerfully over his black lacquered cane. At the age of 77, his body was that of a frail old man, but his eyes were still as sharp as they had been 50 years earlier when he supervised the construction of his first skyscraper. The excitement, the intelligence, the desire to live was still there. Damn, he wanted to live. His doctor's appointment had been just over 2 hours earlier. Dr. David Eaton had been Mike's friend and physician for over 20 years. It's pancreatic cancer, Mike. How long have I got? David had taken a long time before he looked Mike in the eye and answered, 3 months, my friend, outside. That kind of news drove a man to seek his God in the middle of a Friday, even on the day of a game between the Cubs and the St. Louis Cardinals. Not that he was an infrequent visitor to St. Stephen's. No, he came to Mass every week. He'd married his wife Patricia in this very sanctuary 40 years ago, then buried her from here 30 years later. His son Brian and granddaughter Leah had been baptized in the church. On this day, however, he needed to talk with his Maker. For the last hour, he'd been sitting in this pew examining and re-examining his life, trying to make sense of what had passed and make peace with what would never be. He knew he'd been getting old. Somewhere along the line, his lungs had lost the ability to take a deep breath. His prostate cancer 2 years ago had hinted that he couldn't live forever, but today, 3 months, that was mortality. And he had one major goal he had not seen fulfilled. His dream was an architectural in nature. He had finished with building skyscrapers and the other monuments to white-collar bondage years ago. The product of his work partially carved the Chicago skyline. No, Mike's dream was to see the Chicago Cubs win the World Series, a feat they hadn't managed in the 77 years that Mike had been alive. He had purchased his beloved Cubs 5 years earlier, using proceeds from McAllister Construction to foot the bill. Buying the Cubs was the reason he had started McAllister Construction in the first place. It took money to buy a professional baseball team, money and planning. Mike McAllister planned and schemed and made his dreams come true. Most of them. He'd be damned if he died before he saw them realized. He was close, so very close now. The Cubs were poised on the brink of going to the playoffs. Mike's team had the hottest bats in the league. His starting pitchers were the best in the majors. But Mike had one significant problem. His star reliever, Kevin Boswell, was in a slump, a critical slump, the kind of slump that had career-ending year written all over it. Mike grimaced. Besides being the epitome of the gentleman athlete, Kevin Boswell was an active member of the Chicago community, a good man. Kevin had started more than a dozen drug prevention programs throughout the city. And of course, Kevin's relationship with Leah, his granddaughter, was another factor. Mike would like to see his granddaughter happy before he died. Leah McAllister was his pride and joy. Mike frowned. Perhaps Leah was the real reason he didn't want to trade Boswell. He had another solution. For over 3 weeks, Mike had been sitting on the stat sheets of a new pitcher who had been a college star. The player had the talent, the pitch, and apparently the courage to get the job done. The major question was, did Mike dare put his team, he crossed himself at the inappropriate word, heck, the sport to the test? Was Major League Baseball ready for a woman? Off in the distance, Mike heard the Wrigley Field public address announcer begin to call off the lineups for the day's game. He rose, genuflected, and headed down the cathedral's main aisle. A large banner draped over impressive oak doors at the back of the church. Mike's face broke into a smile as he read the familiar verse stitched into the tapestry. I will pour forth my spirit upon all mankind, it read. And old men shall dream dreams